Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank RAUSAN PEREIRA. In its 38th meeting on Wednesday, the GST Council voted for uniform rate of 28% on lotteries across the country. It was for the first time since the launch of the new overarching indirect tax that the Council took a decision through the voting route. During the voting, 21 states voted in favour of a uniform rate on lotteries. On top of the agenda of the meeting was to explore ways and means to maximise revenue collection by checking tax evasion. The government has set a 1.1 lakh crore rupees monthly GST collection target in the remaining 4 months of this fiscal year. How this is going to be achieved remains to be seen. Now, the GST Council also rationalised tax rate on woven and non-woven bags to 18%. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse the indirect tax reform and the way ahead. Joining me on the program today are A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, Bhanuchandar Nagarajan, former consultant, World Bank, Washington, D.C., and Aman Agarwal, Director, Indian Institute of Finance. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Bhattacharya, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand really as far as the 38th GST Council meeting itself was concerned. Sketchy details have emerged as of now, but what are the big takeaways for you?
Well, I think the big takeaway, as you rightly pointed out, is that this is the first time that a voting has taken place. I think it is significant, not in terms of any deviation or distortion in the GST system. Remember that the voting as an option is made available under the GST regime. The only thing is this, that so far in 37 meetings, all decisions were taken through a consensus mode. So this is the first time that 21 states were in favour of a uniform rate on lotteries and the other states were not. So, but I think this is the first indication that GST rates will be discussed, reforms will be discussed, and voting as a way out will be resorted to, which is nothing wrong, but it reflects the evolving character of GST at a time economic slowdown is upon us. So I think that's the first point. But I think the most important, rate changes and all that are part and parcel of the GST process. But the most important thing is that the GST Council had a presentation from a committee that looked at how to augment revenues. We do not as yet know the details of it, but I think the findings of that committee will be a key element that will contribute to the kind of GST that we will see from maybe next year. Because I think there is a general reluctance on the part of the members of GST Council, which constitute of the Finance Minister at the centre and all the state finance ministers, that too many rate changes have taken place in the states are worried about revenue shortfall, so is the centre. Now, in the context of that situation, I think it is important not to make any further changes in an ad hoc fashion. Instead, go in for a considered view, and I think that considered view would emerge from the report of that committee that made its presentation on how to augment GST revenues. There is no doubt that there is a shortfall in revenues. Instead of a 14% increase, now it is 11.5%. I think steps have to be taken how to augment GST revenues, and that committee's report will probably provide the necessary inputs into how the GST rate structure needs to be looked at. I am happy that no ad hoc decision on a rate overall has been taken at this point in time, because without going into the nitty-gritty of it, making those changes in a haphazard, in an ad hoc manner is not going to do good for a GST, which has already seen several changes in rates, making it actually a little more complex in the last 2.5 years.
Okay, all right. So we'll come to what steps need to be taken going forward in just a bit. But before that, Aman Agarwal, as far as the GST is concerned, touted as a landmark reform, something that is going to change the way things function and the way we look at the economy as well and look at indirect taxes. but somehow there seem to be some glitches at this point in time. What is at the crux of the issue?
No, I think the government very well recognizes the fact that there needs to be more simplification, both in terms of form and in terms of implementing it. They have also found the fact that a lot of people have found it difficult, organizations have found it difficult to file, and as a result they have waived the late fee charges going back from the beginning itself. 2017, July 2017 onwards till almost now, and that's what something which is remarkable again. They also found the fact that they need to ease the way systems and input credits are granted, and they have found certain kind of fallacies there, some kind of loopholes or problems which are being occurring, and they are trying to fix those problems as well. So these are some things which are important, which go on in our system. But a more important component is that earlier, because of different tax systems and frameworks within different states in this country, it has become very difficult for people in our industries coming from overseas wanting to invest and establish units here to go about doing their businesses. And many of their queries, when I used to visit some of these chambers like the OECD or the IMF and the World Bank annual meetings, I found that they would always ask this question is that I have started my business in A state and it became very flourishing, but when I started in the B and C state, some places it has not even kicked off, the other places still we are trying to function, and that is something because they understand a GST framework and a one single tax framework, and that actually binds the country in a one structure, and that is something which is revolutionized changes. Please understand, anything which comes new takes times for establishment. Even if it's the simplest possible tax which is to be implemented, it will take time to revise, reform, build and grow like a child grows. And I think I'm happy that the government is also maturing in itself in its decision making process to bring about those changes within the framework, within the GST as well. Now, there has been large number of government corners now talking about lately, which are senior officers at different positions, saying that we need to simplify further from 4 tax rate to 3 tax rate. Now, that might come in due course, but that's going to come in with consensus of the all members, and that is what this voting system clearly outlines, that it's not going to be an ad hoc or a directive framework, it will be more with consensus what every state feels in this country, and that is something which is very peculiar and good at this stage, which brings about the maturity in the system and the framework. Okay. And I think that is something which is being looked upon by the market. Frequent changes, too many frequent changes create distortions, create problems, both for the customer, the individuals who are filing these returns, and for the government also to ultimately regulate it in due course. This would help streamline the whole framework.
Okay, all right. Banu, let me bring you to the picture now. So, there's this target of 1.1 lakh crore rupees for the rest of the few months, of course. Now, how do you see this target being achieved or this target being met?
As we, the November collection numbers were very encouraging, probably driven by the sales during the festive season. Perhaps the GST Council and the members are hoping that the momentum from November is going to be maintained over the next few months. But we have to just wait and see about how it actually pans out. But this, as everybody would know, like the collections in the previous 3 months before November were not very encouraging. They were less than a lakh crore. So one of the things that the conundrum that this committee faced was in a slowing down economy, how do we actually work on revenue augmentation given the fact that you can't actually raise taxes, because raising taxes is a fiscally constraining measure, which is actually going to be not very helpful to the economy. The RBI also did not kind of help in this manner because they didn't actually reduce the interest rates. So given this conundrum, how was the GST Council going to look at the revenue augmentation problem, which was actually stated as one of the objectives of the meeting? So thankfully, like what they have done is they have postponed this or postponed this problem of looking at increasing the rates, but instead they have actually looked at nitty-gritties, trying to bring in more efficiency and create more efficiency measures. For example, there's a lot of discussion, I guess, on more collections. There are like 21 lakh GSTN numbers in India, GSTN IDs. of which like around 3.5 lakh GST IDs had conducted activities in the last 2 months, but they did not file the returns, the GSTR1 form. So, and like now the e-way bill for those IDs have been blocked. So, I mean, so they can't transport their goods legally. So, punitive measures like this, and then they worried about how to look at the inverted duty structure, how to actually, how to actually make sure that the input tax credits, the matching problem is solved, and things like that, and the other measures that my other co-panelists mentioned. So, instead of actually looking at a very strategic perspective in terms of revenue augmentation, which would have involved raising tax rates, they looked at more smaller efficiency measures. I think this is very prudent. Like sometimes, like when constraints are imposed upon the committee, you actually look at more innovative ways of enhancing revenues and stabilizing the system, and that is perhaps what the GST Council has done this time.
Okay, all right. Going forward now, Mr. Bhattacharya, let's take one step back as well, because you know, as far as the compensation was concerned, there was a lot of tussle between the states and the centre, really, as far as the GST compensation is concerned. This is something now that the Finance Minister of West Bengal has come out and spoken as well after the meeting. He has said that the centre is not going to have funds come February to compensate the states. So, is this going to be something that is going to be a problem going forward?
Well, I think it's a very important issue. Compensation cess and the compensation distribution to the states is a very important issue because you know, your earlier question of how difficult will be the target of 1.1 lakh in the remaining 4 months, and out of those 4 months, in 1 month you have to collect 1.25 lakh crore. So it is not going to be an easy target, and this is linked to how do you make sure that the states get their due share of compensation cess. As we know that August-September dues have been disbursed, from no disbursement has taken place from October onwards. Now these dues are mounting, and therefore there was this proposal that why don't you impose a small cess or 2% cess or a cess on the items which are attracting 28% duties, because the number of the items have been brought down under the 28% bracket from 230 to only 30. Now identify those 30 items and say they already have a cess, you increase the cess by a few percentage points more, and whatever extra you get, you share that with the states. Now I think in the fitness of things, the GST Council view is that at a time when the economy is slowing down, instead of cutting rates, if you raise rates, probably it will be a bigger blow to the economy than a blow that the states can probably withstand, given the fact that it's the burden of that will be distributed among the 30 states. Now, having said that, let me also say that there could have been many other steps that the GST Council could have explored. We do not as yet know whether those discussions took place, but possibly one option could be how you reduce the inverted structure of the duties. For example, the textile sector is a classic case where the final duty is lower than the duty that is being paid by the textile producers in the intermediate stages. So what you have seen is almost around 30,000 crore of extra refunds that are being claimed. The input tax credit are being claimed. Now clearly it is an inverted this thing, and something has to be done. Either the intermediate tax rates have to be brought down, or the final product on the textile sector have to be raised appropriately. And finally, I would say that there is a tax evasion issue which the GST Council will have to tackle, which is arising largely because that the 5% rate, which accounts for almost 105,000 crore, which is 1.05 lakh crore of revenues in a year. Now that category does not enjoy any input tax credit. Now the moment you don't enjoy input tax credit in a revenue item which accounts for almost a fifth of your central GST, then what happens is tax evasion is a possibility because the value chain is broken. Now, once the value chain is broken, then tax evasion becomes a problem that even the GST system cannot track. So therefore, something has to be worked out, and we, as I said, we don't know whether those things were discussed or whether the Revenue Augmentation Committee, the presentation it made, had those provisions, but some measures have to be taken over the next few months to plug those gaps, to make sure, as Mr. Bhanu Nagachandran said, that efficiency have to be improved, but along with that, you have to fix some of these weaknesses in the system by which tax evasion comes down, by which the input tax credit as a result of inverted tax duty structure comes down.
Right.
So these steps will have to be taken and maybe resulting in lower slabs and reduced number of slabs. Instead of the 5 or 6 slabs right now you have, you bring them down. So some increases, some decreases. So finally the overall revenue tax collection rate goes up from 11.5% or so.
Right. All right. Aman Agarwal, you know, as far as the tax net or the tax base is concerned, of course, it has widened. But tax evasion, like Mr. Bhattacharya pointed out, continues to be a problem. He spoke about steps as well. Talking about steps, what more needs to be done in the immediate near future, do you think, so as to ensure that we see a more streamlined GST?
You see, I think I've been speaking about from the very beginning, the government needs to consider in bringing the fuel, the oil and the petrol and oil into the GST framework. This will directly give a bounce to the economy because that cuts down on their huge costs to an individual as well as an organization, whether it is transportation of goods or services. Let us understand about 64-65% comes from services sector. People like you and me working in that services sector, our costs actually come down. That means we have more consumable income which can be spent on other necessary good and items. So there would be a bounce in the indirect taxes which will get collected through the means of our own consumption structures which are there. Now that is important, but the problem is of the states not wanting to let go. But given the fact that large number of states are having, leaving a few, some big now, which are not where the current central government rule is not there, they are having the central government similar as the state as well. So they can try and introduce it, because if they are able to introduce it, they would be able to bring out a big structure, and they have to do it in due course. It's only a question of matter of time of 6 months, a year, 1 year, 2 years, or and so on and so forth. They cannot keep it out of the net. Now that is something which is very important in my opinion. The second factor which is there is the ease of the form. There are too many forms and too complicated forms, and that's where the matching of inputs and structures is not taking place. The government still needs to look at a framework or the software to make it even more easier for the producer to actually go about filing the returns. As we make it easier, it becomes more comfortable and there will be more returns filed. I think the target of 1.1 lakh crore is not that much. We have been hovering around that for quite some time. 1 lakh crore is something on an average we have been hovering around. So it's not something which is a hugely tall target which has been kept. The question is more so, and we fortunately saw that even Shaktikant Das mentioned it, that they are seeing some new offshoots growing now in the economy. That meaning thereby that the MSME segment, and we saw the disbursements which took place in terms of credit flow, which is also a big concern of large number of industrialists, that there has been an increase in the credit flow. And if we are able to ease that, the decision of his not reducing the interest rates, I think is a remarkable decision this time. Because how long can you go about reducing and keep reducing the interest rates with no impact on the economy per se? There has to be a time when it has to stop. And I'm happy he took this decision now than later when it have even hurt the economy more. So from this perspective, there would be the role that the industry understands that there will be no further easing of liquidity. If you want to take liquidity, if you want to do your business, it's better you start doing it now, because that's the bottoming of the interest rates which have already taken place. Now, I think from that perspective, these offshoots, the bottoming off, I think would ultimately lead to, we may see some kind of fiscal spending which may happen in due course. Sure. And that is being expected and has been waiting for almost last 2 months now from the Ministry of Finance. But I think that may come in due course. And once that happens, we may see a little more buoyancy in the framework, which will lead to this 1.1, 1.2 lakh crore of revenue collection in terms of GST. I think there is a full faith in the system, and I have had a discussion with large number of exporters, importers, manufacturers. Yes, they have problems with the GST credit because they say now we need to finance that money also. But leaving that, they say there is no difficulty in the system. We are able to get large number of our input credits. We are able to do business. We are able to do transactions, and it has become now a part of our system. So it is no longer that difficulty which used to be seen in July 2017 or even till the mid of 2018 that, oh, we did not know how to go about doing it, what is to be done. That kind of a difficulty is completely gone off the frame.
All right. There are certain sections, there are certain finance ministers as well who are speaking about a complete overhaul as far as the system is concerned. Now, when we talk of a complete overhaul, Banu, what kind of an overhaul can we see really as far as the GST is concerned?
See, actually, sometimes when we talk about these nitty-gritties, these problems, we forget the past completely. Like before July 2017, when the GST was promulgated, we had a very messy system of cascading taxes, so many taxes, customs, excise, service tax, octroi, so on and so forth. So it was an absolute mess. Like then the GST came in, but when the GST came in, just to get buy-in from not only the states but also from the general public, the rates were kept pretty low. So if you look at, if you remember those times, the revenue neutral rate was around like 15 to 15.5%. Now you look, if you look at it, the effective tax rate is around 11.5%. So there has been a revenue shortfall consistently just to make people come into the system and like kind of get settled down. And then around, if you look at it, 80% of the goods are less than 18 or less than 18% in the 18% tax rate. So, and 1,300 goods and 500 services, they were all combined and they were put in various buckets. So it was a massive reform already. So, and all of these problems, these teething problems are part of the journey. And I think this is the evolution of GST so far has been a quintessential Indian reform process. Like when there was absolutely disorganized sector, now like we are kind of put them into 5 buckets. Now we are solving the efficiency issues. Like the other panelists mentioned, many analysts mentioned as well, like now maybe we'll slowly move into a three-tiered structure and then probably a single rate. In fact, recently Vijay Kelkar and in his book, he has mentioned that like an appropriate tax rate would be 10%, which is very much like Australia. In Canada, it's around 13% or so. And if you look at all of these countries, they took quite a lot of time to actually reach here. So they didn't reach here overnight. So we should be a little bit more patient about this. We should remember the pains of the past. And it is going, and I think it is going in the right direction. Also, if you look at not just this, the overall tax architecture in India, if you look at the corporate tax rate, now probably the personal taxes will actually come for some more reform in the near future. So these things are also in the offing. So I think a tax architecture that can support a modern economy is being constructed slowly. I think we should actually look at a bigger perspective. One quick thing. If you look at the tax to GDP ratio, in India it's quite low. It's around 17% if you look at both the center and state put together. The OECD number is around double of that, 34%. So like I think we have to go, we have a long way to go if we have to provide proper public services to increase our tax increase our tax recoveries. So I think somehow we have to plug the leaks. We have to increase the rate slowly when the economy is amenable. So we have to move in that direction. I think they will, but I think as far as today's meeting is concerned, quite prudently they actually tinkered with the efficiency measures rather than kind of throw the baby and bathwater outside.
Okay, all right. Quick closing comments now from all my guests because I've got limited time on the program. So, with the best way forward, what's the best way forward, Mr.
I think
Bhattacharya?
the best way forward would be not to underestimate the GST challenge. I think it's important to understand what landed us in this current situation of GST. The current situation, the GST was launched under a framework which is the inflation framework of 2 to 6% framework. Now, as a result of which, in my view, GST rates were brought down even before they were actually required to provide a kind of a fiscal stimulus to the economy when the economy slows down. So, if you look back in time, you see that the GST rates that were brought down very sharply from December 2017 to December 2018 were probably well in advance of what they should have been done to counter an economic slowdown impact.
Right.
So therefore, I personally feel is this, as long as you have a 2 to 6% RBI mandated inflation framework, it will be a very, very difficult challenge to meet both the ends of inflation targeting as well as a growth inducing GST framework.
Sure. All right. Aman Agarwal.
No, I think the tax structure currently is fairly normalized. It needs to be a little more simplified in terms of the rates as well as in terms of the application of it. As far as the states looking only at taxes, we have seen in the past that large number of countries have based their incomes and growth only on taxes, including the kingdoms which used to be there. That is not something which is really right. We've seen the Singaporean model, which was built completely on a zero tax based framework, and that basically means creating a consumption-led economic framework, structuring, inducing growth into the economy, putting money in the pockets of the people, so though they go about spending, they go about churning the economy, the wheel of the economy, and that brings growth ultimately to the people and the government together.
Right.
And I think that is something which this government is also looking at trying to do. So in that perspective, I think the decision of not raising any rates this time was a very welcome decision, and trying to simplify and bringing in administrative measures to remove certain hurdles is something which is very welcome. They must do that more frequently. It should become a routine, and I think that will help the system and let it percolate to the grassroots level.
Right,
Have
right.
more and more people in the net, which will help streamline and bring in more revenue for the
all right.
GST framework instead of raising those taxes to a higher level.
All right. And Banu, close the show for us with the concluding remarks.
Adding to what my fellow panelists were saying, revenue augmentation is an important measure, though they have paused it on this time, but they have to actually address this at some point of time, and the 15th Finance Commission recommendations are going to kick in from April of next year. So for a prudent tax architecture, the GST Council and the Finance Commission of the futures should speak with each other more, so that like we get and collect optimum amount of taxes, so that we can deliver proper public goods for the betterment of the country.
Okay. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.